Dylan's family, Elaine Hall and Corey Redwine, to join me. I'd also like to invite up my prosecution team, Michael Doherty and Fred Johnson. If you guys would come on up here. Finally, I'd like to invite up our law enforcement team that worked this case, Jim Mazzell and Tanya Goldbright. If you guys would come on up here, we really appreciate that. The format here is that I'll be taking the questions directly. None of these folks were prepared to even stand up here with me, and they were not expecting to take questions. So please direct your questions to me, and we'll start there. Today is a day of reckoning and a day of justice. Today is a day of closure. Closure for Dylan's family and closure for this community. Today is a day of sadness and remembrance. Today, we remember Dylan Redwine. Dylan was an innocent and beautiful young man. He didn't deserve what happened to him. No victim of violent crime ever does. He was a young man who was full of life and a full, bright future ahead of him. A future that was stolen by his father, Mark Redwine, in a terrible act of brutal violence. Today's sentence was handed down for Mark Allen Redwine for the murder of his son, Dylan. He violated that sacred trust that every parent is given, the ultimate sacred duty to keep our children safe. He broke that trust. And today, a day of reckoning, he got the justice that he deserves in the form of a 48-year sentence in the Department of Corrections. I want to thank all those who made this possible. The amazing team at the Plata County Sheriff's Office, especially Jim Mazzell and Tanya Goldbright, Tom Cowing, but truly all the people who worked on this case. This case represents the best of law enforcement, a team of dedicated officers who worked this case tirelessly, investigating every lead, following every possibility. This team made miracles happen. And even when the case seemed bleak, and they may never be able to find justice for Dylan, they never gave up. This is a lesson for all of law enforcement that if you keep working these cases, if you never stop, you can solve the hardest cases. There's over 1,500 open cold case homicides unsolved in the state of Colorado. And today, we took Dylan Redwine's name off that list. I want to thank the people of this community, the people who volunteered to come forward and help search for Dylan, dedicating countless hours, tirelessly searching, hoping against hope that they would find some clue that would bring Dylan home to his family. Together, united as a community, we achieved justice for Dylan Redwine and for his family. And I want to thank this amazing trial team who worked on the case. Michael Doherty, Fred Johnson, and Matt Durkin, Chuck Heidel, Nicole Dean, Karen Neighbor, and Jane Foy. Their tireless efforts brought this case to a conviction and helped us achieve justice for Dylan Redwine. This case represents the best of what Colorado's prosecution community can achieve. From the beginning, support flowed in from across the state, and Colorado's prosecution community offered the best of the best to this case. A team of lawyers and paralegals and investigators whose excellence is without parallel, dedicated to bringing justice for Dylan's family. And on behalf of this community, we thank you all from the bottom of our hearts. Finally, I want to thank Elaine Hall and Corey Redwine and Mike Hall and their whole family for sticking with us through every step of the way, never giving up hope that we could get this day of justice for Dylan. This case was long and extremely difficult. The endless perseverance of Elaine Hall and her family are a shining example of the power of remaining steadfast in the quest to achieve justice for a lost loved one. And they are a symbol of hope for all the families who are still out there awaiting their day of justice. That concludes my opening remarks. I'd like to, at this time, open it up to questions, first from the press and media who are here in the room. At this point, I'd like to hold off. I'd like to answer questions directly and see if we can start there. I didn't want to put them on the spot because they weren't prepared to speak today, but we'll check back in on that if that's okay. The investigators who worked on this case truly left no stone unturned. The case originally came in as a missing child, and they searched every inch of Middle Mountain, which is a huge area, turning over every rock, every leaf, every stone to see if they might find some clue, some evidence. As the winter wore on in 2012 and 2013, that no longer became possible. And they redirected their efforts to canvassing the community and searching in other ways, following up on hundreds, if not thousands of tips. But when the summer of 2013 came around, this team organized one of the most effective and wide-ranging searches of Middle Mountain in the Plata County history. And in those days, a miracle happened, and they found Dylan's remains. That was a huge breaking point in this case, is that clearly indicated that Dylan was no longer with us. And the circumstances of his remains clearly indicated that a murder had taken place. However, more evidence needed to be developed and gathered. And in 2015, another miracle was handed down in this case when we found Dylan's remains in a different part of Middle Mountain. We found his cranium. And that moment changed the face of this case going forward. Developing that evidence, having the patience to wait until the case reached a strong enough point that we were able to achieve a conviction was our biggest challenge, but it was also our greatest victory.
You talk about the appeals process. Will you guys be involved in that at all? And how long can that potentially drag on for?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. As I understand it, it relates to the appeals process and the timeframes for which that can occur. At this point, Mr. Redwine has been convicted by a jury, and as a result, he has a right to appeal, as does everyone convicted of a crime in Colorado. The Attorney General's Office of the state of Colorado handles appeals on behalf of the 22 judicial districts in our state. They have an excellent team of lawyers who will be handling any appeals filed by the defense and the defendant in this case. That time frame can take years, and the appeals process can drag on for an extended time period, as there are multiple different levels of appeal and types of appeal of which the defendant can avail himself. We are well prepared and well positioned to face those appeals head on. We feel very confident that the trial was conducted in a fair and impartial manner, and that the rights of the defendant were preserved throughout that trial. So we have every reason to believe that this conviction will survive appellate appeal, and we'll be ready to face any challenges that come down.
Were you disappointed that the judge said the sentences will run concurrently?
Thank you for the question relating to whether we were disappointed as to whether the sentences running concurrently and the impact that that had on the case. The law in Colorado requires that where two convictions are supported by identical evidence, that sentences for those crimes be concurrent to each other or running at the same time. So it's a legal requirement that those sentences were concurrent, and our team was expecting that.
Can you discuss how Mark, stories changed when he initially pulled it and how important it was to document that to the jury?
Question relates to how important it was for us that Mark Redwine's stories changed over time and how important it was for us to document that to the jury. In the hours after Dylan's disappearance and murder, Mark Redwine's statements were very succinct and short and vague. He essentially described that he got up the morning of the 19th, Dylan was asleep on the couch, that he left the home, and when he returned several hours later, Dylan was gone. One of the things that the investigators on this case, especially FBI agent John Grusing, recognized early was that this statement was very suspicious. People, I should say parents who have lost a child or have a missing child are often beside themselves and completely searching in every way and shape and form possible to think of every single fact that they can relate to law enforcement so that law enforcement will be well equipped to go and search for their child and investigate what may have happened. So we most often expect to see very effusive statements, very detailed statements, and a level of panic in a parent that belies the loss of their child. We saw none of that in Mark Redwine's earliest statements to law enforcement. And as time developed and it became clear that Dylan was not a missing child or a runaway, but in fact, most likely a victim of foul play, law enforcement revisited Mr. Redwine's earliest statements and confronted him with those statements. And as they developed evidence in the case, especially evidence relating to the search warrant executed in Mark Redwine's home, they were able to confront him with that evidence. One of the most important turning points in the case in those early stages was the fact that blood was found in Mark Redwine's home. And Mark Redwine had never alluded or mentioned the fact that there was any blood in his home. When he was confronted with that fact, he began to change his story and he began to discuss possible reasons or excuses that seemed very specious and unlikely to us as to how that blood was deposited in the home. When he was confronted with the fact that we would be searching for DNA, he began to invent reasons why that DNA may be there. These changing stories reflected that he had something to hide and a consciousness of his own guilt. And when we presented that to the jury, they found that very persuasive by my understanding of their deliberations and verdict.
Comment on his criticism of the sham trial.
My comment is that, in my opinion, he was given every bit of process that was due to him and then more. Part of the reason that this trial and these proceedings took so long is because the judge and the prosecution wanted to make sure that every single right that he had as a defendant was honored to the fullest possible degree to ensure that he got a fair proceeding with an impartial jury and that we would avoid any potential appellate issues to that end. So sometimes over our objection, the judge granted him roughly 2 years of pre-trial preparation time to review the evidence, to develop experts, to develop a trial strategy. We felt that that was probably too much. However, in an abundance of caution, we generally entered our objection, but recognized that the court was inclined to grant that level of process to Mr. Redwine. The trial was continued over our objection many times after that. Many of those objections related to his request for more time to prepare. So for him to say that this was a sham trial is absurd. He was given every bit of process due to him and then some, and he received a fair trial for every day of the 5 weeks this trial lasted.
In the aftermath of this case, thanks to the efforts by Elaine and others, Colorado has since changed to make it a felony to tamper with the body. If that law had been in effect earlier, would that have been possibly added to Mark's sentence?
Thank you for the question. It relates to whether or not we would have considered charging abuse of a corpse for Mark Redwine's behavior had it been a felony available to us at the time. And the answer is certainly yes. As I talked about at the sentencing hearing, one of the most aggravating factors of this case is the way that Mark so brazenly and callously disposed of his son's body. And we was absolutely pursued that charge had it been a felony level charge at the time.
There's a lot of talk about the outpouring of support in the community. And is there any way to quantify that amount of, emotional, financial, and time that the community spent? The cost that was associated with that?
The question relates to whether or not there's any way to quantify the amount of effort, time, and cost expended by this community in efforts to try to find Dylan Redwine. And the simple answer is no. There were so many hundreds and hundreds of people from our community and people who came in from other communities to help find Dylan, to search for any possible clue. And these searches occurred over and over and over again. There were dozens of searches, not only just from the days immediately following Dylan's disappearance, but the summers afterwards, even from the time of finding his remains in 2013 to the summers 2014 and 15. We had hundreds of people from all over the state and all over this country come to Durango to try to help find Dylan and to help support Elaine and Corey and their family. And there's really no way to ever put a number on that. But I can never stress enough how deep our thanks is to all those people who contributed to those efforts. You helped make our community come together. You helped bring a conviction for Dylan Redwine, and you helped get justice for his family.
Okay, can I also ask what, on the same idea of cost, what this cost the 6th District to drag it in such a long case,
Thank you for the question. It relates to how much this case cost as far as cost of prosecution and bringing the case forward. What I can tell you is that we're still calculating those numbers. I don't have a solid final number for you, but I can tell you that the unending and unquestioned support of all 3 counties of the 6th Judicial District has been behind this case from the very beginning. So the boards of county commissioners of La Plata County, Archuleta County, and San Juan County have been dedicated to ensuring that our office is properly resourced to handle this case. And then they have made sure that we have had every ounce of support that we could possibly need. And I also want to say that the 1st Judicial District, the 20th Judicial District, and the people of those communities and their support can never be understated in helping us complete this case and get this conviction. One moment. At this time, Elaine Hall and Corey Redwine are willing to answer the question that you posed earlier, so I'm going to call them forward to the podium.
To address your father before he was sentenced.
My reaction to the verdict was obviously, I don't want to say happy, but I'm proud that I believe the right sentence was given out. This has been 9 years that this has worn on my mind and my body in ways that I can never describe. So to think about how I felt those 9 years, and for his 48, there's still not enough for the previous 9 years that, the heartache that our family has endured.
Court today.
It was kind of overwhelming with emotion to walk into the courtroom. like I said, this is 9 years that not only my mother and I have put in, but also the entire La Plata County, the district attorney's office, and we've shared a lot of the heartache together. So when you're just kind of waiting to hear what that is, obviously there's a lot of emotions inside of you. But overall, at the end of the day and how I feel right now, I couldn't be more pleased with the result. I couldn't be more pleased with the condition and the situation that Mark is in currently. It's a direct representation of what he's had to accomplish in his 60 years. So his next 48 are his challenge to overcome. And it is my job now moving forward to remember Dylan and the love that not only my family has shared, but also the entire community. So, moving forward, Mark is no longer in my mindset. It is about the growth of Dylan and trying to navigate making sure that he stays, in our memories for years to come.
Thank you.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Just your reaction to the verdict, the sentence, I'm sorry.
I think my reaction to the sentence was kind of the same as everybody else's. I kind of expected it and would have been upset if it wouldn't have happened the way it did. But that's kind of been true with this whole process. So, 48 years is not going to do anything as far as bringing Dylan back or making things okay there. But it will certainly, make a statement to everybody else. Domestic violence is really prolific, and it's harming our children, it's harming our communities. And so I hope this sends out a message to, those who aren't nice to their families. And if Mark is the poster child for that, so be it.
What did it feel like for you after all these years to be addressing in court just before a sentence was imposed?
It's a lot easier than it actually is going up there and having the opportunity to speak. But again, I mean, the words we speak, they never resonate with Mark. And so it's just kind of a waste of words. And honestly, the last 9 years, just listening to all his lies and his silence, at this point, it was more about, the peace I needed for myself and my family than any anger or resentment I have towards him. He can work that out for the next 48 years.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming.
I just want to finish by stating that, reiterating, if you're one of those 1,500 families who's waiting for your day of justice, this is living proof that if you never give up and you never stop fighting, you too can achieve justice for your lost loved ones. And to law enforcement and prosecutors out there, we have that duty to keep fighting and to never give up. And I just, again, want to say how incredibly thankful I am to everybody standing here next to me and to our entire community. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Appreciate it.